WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Our Baltimore Positive mission this week brings us to Fadley's Seafood in Lexington Market. We will have Baltimore City Council President Brandon Scott and mayoral candidate Brandon Scott as well, Don Moeller. Make sure you're checking out everything we're doing with Sarah Heminger of Thread, also Stuart Berger, former Baltimore County Superintendent, and all of our Kansas City coverage in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Luke is around. Tell you what, it's not Michigan week around here, but it's always Michigan week somewhere. They are singing the Michigan fight song. I have many Michigan friends of mine. Hello, Leslie. Hello, Jason. All of my Matt Nahagian, all my big blue friends. Overtime is the book, and I found this pretty compelling because I don't know John U. Bacon, but I'm about to get to know him. But I do know Jim and John and Jack and Jackie Harbaugh. And this book is about Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines at the crossroads of college football. We welcome in a guy that I'm really happy to have on because I love the guys that write books because they always are the ones that tell the stories. John U. Bacon is a New York Times best-selling author. Dude, good to have you aboard, man. I appreciate you making a little time out while you're making fruit smoothies and whatnot and getting ready to hopefully sign and sell some. I hope your wrists hurt from selling these. There's enough Michigan fans to sell 1 million of these, right, John?
Let's hope. What the key to these books, Nestor, is that you have to get the base, obviously, the Michigan fans and so on. If that's all you get, you won't get a bestseller. So you also need to get people who care about college football or just want a good story. And in that case, hopefully you can provide that as well to a larger audience.
All right. Well, I've known Jim Harbaugh, and I could write, a nice little chapter, and I think I have written a chapter or two about Jim Harbaugh in my books, even before John Harbaugh got here. And I know the family. Jack was here earlier this week, and Jack and I have gone to baseball games together. Jim and I have gone to Hootie and the Blowfish concerts together. And John and I have raised a lot of money together and done some cool things together. I like the family immensely. I would say this, Jim is the guy I know the longest, from being the quarterback here and Captain Comeback and Ted Marchibroda and all that stuff. And I am fascinated with what has become of his life. I remember him wanting to talk about coaching and his brother being a special teams coach up in Philadelphia at the time. And this week we got John Harbaugh and Andy Reid getting together as elder statesmen. I am fascinated by what's next for Jim Harbaugh and whether there's going to be a championship there and all of the pressure that goes back to going back to hometown and Bo and Dad and trying to do something that even if he does it once, they're going to say he didn't do it twice.
Those are Michigan fans, of course. I grew up in the Bo era. Jim and I are the same age, actually, so I grew up playing baseball against him and hockey with him, and one of us, Nestor, is a great athlete, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, John would have said that too.
Well, actually he has, to his credit. I had a great interview with John. I know that John, Jim, and Jack all enjoy talking to you, so you come highly recommended.
Oh, boy.
But for this book, I sat down with John and Jack Harbaugh for about 2.5 hours, very generous. And then I also sat down with Jim and Jack Harbaugh for about 3 hours. And that's kind of the key to all those guys. If Jack is there or Sarah's there, they're going to talk. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I know that Jim does not give a lot in his press conferences, but he enjoys them very much. But if you get him in an environment where he's having a good time, that goes a very long way. And we had great interviews. And as you said, John readily said that Jim was a natural and I was the grinder. And that kind of set up the relationship from the start, really.
Did John tell you the story about how Jim almost killed him in the ocean down in Florida, or no? Did he not tell that one?
I heard that story. It's not in the book, but by all means, tell it.
No. John's told that one many times, and recently, and John has always sort of been in the shadow, right? I mean, I think sort of famously, and now Jim's doing this thing at Michigan, and his decision to go back to college and try to do it this way, and having had a good time at Stanford. Hey, I remember when he took the San Diego job, and I was kind of shocked by it then that he wanted to start at that level or that's where he wanted to be. He was calling my show, at that time, turn of the century when he had just gotten out of the game. For you and the inside of this and what's burning at Jim Harbaugh and wanting to do something we all talk about doing, right? Like the Bon Jovi song. They say you can't go home. Who says you can't go home? This is a very, very difficult thing to do in any circumstance at that level. And Ozzie Newsome has avoided going back to Alabama as a great example, right?
Well, all good points there, of course. And, John and Jim, it sets up the relationship. And Jack has always said about Jim that the cockiness came from Jim hanging out with John every day. And John said he was not tagging along. He was part of my gang and fully accepted as such. But those guys are 2 years older, and they're good athletes. So Jim had to muster up his confidence for that. What's kind of surprising, you have to give Jim credit for this, is that, John was a grinder, went to Miami, and when I asked Bo Schembechler, how is Miami of Ohio the cradle of coaches? And they've got 14 Hall of Fame coaches out of that place. Paul Brown, Dwight Perry, Eric Parsegian, Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler.
Everything's Dwight Perry, by the way, in the Harbaugh family. You cannot have a Harbaugh family conversation without Dwight Perry being brought up, correct?
Amazingly. The Bowling Green legend, by the way, for you guys from Maryland. But
and by the way, Miami had some sports writing legends, too, and they'll all tell you about it.
That's true, too. That is true, too. So I asked Bo one time, how is Miami the cradle of coaches? And he said, that's easy. We couldn't play. So if you want to stay in the game, you coach. That was John. John knew he was never going to get a paycheck playing this game. So he was a grinder from the start. What's more surprising in some ways is that Jim humbled himself after 14 years in the NFL to grind also at University of San Diego, Division II program, then Stanford, of course, then the 49ers, now back to Michigan. But of all the guys in Bo Schembechler's coaching tree, he's kind of the least likely. You expect a backup lineman like Les Miles to do that kind of stuff. You don't expect a Big Ten MVP quarterback to put in those kind of hours, and that is what Jim has done.
Well, I think it's fascinating for all these guys. Marino took a job in Miami for 10 seconds. Elway took a job in Denver after running car dealerships and is all in. And, Ozzie started as the lowly scout and the assistant to the assistant coaches and whatever, and winds up going to the Hall of Fame again, right, as a general manager. It is fascinating what burns at folks, and I think for the Harbaugh boys and even their brother-in-law, right, I think there's this whole thing about growing up around a kitchen table where dad was a coach, and that's all they've ever kind of wanted to be. They've all could have gone to television by now. John has his pelts. John could have hung it up last year the way Brian Billick, my partner here, did and just said, I don't want to do this anymore. John has signed on and has as much energy for Lamar Jackson as, I guess he probably did the first time he had a safety at Cincinnati 25 years ago or whatever, right? And they love football, and it's a football family, and they're proud of all of that. But I think Jim is the one who's a little unfulfilled in all of this, right? Like, to some degree, without winning, there's more of a fire about Jim at this point, and Jim was the guy who had it all 30 years ago, right?
Well, in some ways, you're kind of right. I mean, I don't think Jim would ever say his career at Michigan was complete without beating the Buckeyes, without winning the division. They were co-champs last year for the division, without winning the Big Ten and getting a shot at a national playoff. Now, whether he can beat the Alabamas, the Clemson these days, hard to say. But there's no way, I cannot imagine Jim ever finishing at Michigan without doing those things. Just cannot imagine it. And like you said, what drives these guys is not money or fame. They really don't care much about either one, I don't think. They are competitive to the core. And I've got a great scene in the book after Jack has his heart attack. This is not the great scene, his heart attack, of course, but he's got a heart attack in 2016. Both boys fly up to Milwaukee to keep him company. He's coming out of his surgery in his private room with anesthesia and so on. These guys got to compete, and they can't just sit there and talk. So they found a chessboard. They don't play chess, but they got to compete. So they got a cell phone light on the chessboard when Jack finally comes to, and he sees the light, and then he hears these guys arguing endlessly about whose turn it is, who has the most wins, all this stuff. And Jack jokes, I always thought that maybe hell was completely dark or insanely hot. No, hell was this never-ending argument between my two sons with numbing repetition that will never, ever end. And that's, a hospital room in 2016 in Milwaukee, 4 o'clock in the morning, these guys have to compete. It's part of the blood, as you know.
Well, it's fascinating, too, that, through all of this and the relationship between the two of them, to be in the room that day in New Orleans where they had to have this press conference at the Super Bowl. That'll never be replicated again, right? Like the strangeness, the bizarreness of all the Harbaughs, and for Jim to sort of walk away and go back to college and put an end to that to some degree, where Eli and Peyton, who knows? Eli might be running Ole Miss and Peyton might be running Tennessee 15 years from now, right? Like that would be the pathway of Jim Harbaugh, right? And John Harbaugh might run Ohio State before it's, I don't know, or Notre Dame or whatever. But it is fascinating that for Jim at this point that he chose this thing to do. And I guess for your book, give me the genesis of why you chose to write this right now. You have a great passion for the topic, don't you, John?
Well, I better to work those kind of hours, of course, as you do for your job. But my feeling was I thought I'd written my last football book in 2015. I'd written a book with John Saunders of ESPN in the meantime about mental health. Then I also wrote a book called The Great Halifax Explosion, which became a national bestseller about a whole different thing. Look it up. But it's what made U.S. and Canada allies, so I was kind of branching out. That book did very well. But I felt...
So nobody yelled stick to sports to you is what you're saying.
I don't have to, right, but I enjoy it. And what happened with this book is I felt I'd left some questions unanswered. What is Jim Harbaugh and the Harbaugh family really like? And you're at the core of that, of course. So you get a two-dimensional caricature from the media about Jim. I knew there was more to it than that. So I tried to get down to all that stuff by talking to his third-grade classmates, his seventh-grade teammates, his ninth-grade junior high coach. Being a native Ann Arborite, that was a big help there. I also want to know, what is it like to be a player in this program? So I talked to all those guys in real time before and after every game this season. I had 4 offense, 4 defense, some big names, some walk-ons. I talked to their parents. What is it like to be a parent in the program? And finally, the staffers, from the nutritionist to the strength coach to the academic advisors. There are 67 full-time employees in that building. And their favorite question is, what do you guys do in the off-season? As though there's nothing to do. And their answer is, we scale our hours back from 100 hours a week during the season to 50 hours a week in the quote-unquote off-season. So this is if you don't care about Michigan football, but you want to know how the whole thing actually works, this is one of the best deep dives you're going to get, I think.
Well, look, I was serious about the Terps last week after they beat Syracuse.
So was I. What happened? What happened?
Pissed off a whole nother journalism school there up at Syracuse. And then the Temple thing, they stubbed their toe. So as a Maryland fan, I did do some conversation last week. No one really thinks they're ever going to compete with Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State competitively in a football year after year. I had a laugh with Orlando Brown Jr. and some of the young Ravens players, Mark Andrews and some others, about the Oklahoma program. Sam Cook and I have talked about the Nebraska program. And what it looks like even in the locker rooms, and what the resources and the gyms and everything looks like there, even versus the Ravens. And they've spent a lot of money here, as you well know, John, in making the Ravens facility as nice as they can make it. But these colleges are like on a whole different level that come into the NFL sort of a downgrade if you've been to one of these schools. There's nobody in Maryland that really believes they're ever going to have those kind of resources because of how seriously it's taken at Alabama and at places in the SEC and at Notre Dame and Michigan and these places, that Maryland's always going to be sort of second division, even though they're in the Big Ten. And, I guess you're on the inside of it, and this book would sort of indicate just how important it is. And, taking that on, it's not a job for everybody. I mean, Saban and Harbaugh and these guys that can sort of outlast it, God bless them. I mean, I guess John Gruden will outlast it all in Vegas with the Raiders when you have a 10-year deal. But these jobs are quite the pressure cookers when you got to play 8 or 10 games and win them all, right?
Oh, it's brutal. In fact, I've been around, you have too, the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, you name it. Man, I don't think there's any sport where there's more pressure on a coach than college football. In basketball, of course, the Terrapins will get 2 whacks at Michigan State, 2 whacks at Michigan usually, Indiana, whatever. In football, man, you got one shot at everybody, and you don't see them again for a year. You only have 12 games. It's not the NFL, where the Ravens are going to play, of course, the Bengals twice and their division rivals twice. You don't get Ohio State twice. You get them once, and you lose that game. You got to think about it for a year, and that's a very unpleasant year if you're a Wolverine, of course. And so the pressure is immense, no question about it. Versus Alabama and Clemson, I've got a chapter on that called Hard to Beat the Cheaters. You see where I'm going with this. There are a lot of reasons why they're better in the South right now. One is geography, that got warm weather. The economy has gone south, literally, in terms of the resources, the talent, and so on. You can no longer win, I don't think, a national title just with Midwestern players. You need to get 5 or 10 from down south. Alabama can recruit the South. Florida only needs to recruit Florida. So that's a huge advantage there. But also in the SEC, they only sponsor, on average, 18, 19 sports per school. In the Big Ten, it's as many as 30, almost twice as many. Maryland, of course, has got fantastic basketball, serious lacrosse, men's and women's. Other sports are very good at Maryland. Alabama, Clemson, they don't care about much except for football. All resources go to football. that is a point of emphasis.
Well, that's the moneymaker, right? And I guess for the money-making part of this, and look, we've had concerts, we've had hockey games at the Big House now, right? And there's nothing quite like. By the way, I've never been there. I had an opportunity a couple years ago. There's a thought, a movement about. I just find it very, very difficult to get motivated to fly to Detroit, to drive to Ann Arbor, to see the streets all lined, and then to look up and have it be 34-7 at halftime and 63-20, whatever it's going to be. As a Maryland guy, it's very, very hard. I'm waiting for that Maryland team that lures me to the Big House where we'll only lose by like 2 touchdowns.
Well, of course, Maryland did win in 2014, which might be the single most miserable day I've ever seen at Michigan Stadium. A cold rain.
You're welcome.
There you go. A cold rain, mid-November. The AD had already been fired, and the head coach is about to be fired, and no one thought in a million years that Harbaugh was going to come. So that was about as low as it got for Michigan, although not a bad Maryland team. So DJ Durkin, I thought was going to go in the right direction, of course, then tragedy struck.
Yeah, that didn't go well.
No, it did not go well, and that's in the book, too, of course, about all that stuff. And, of course, Durkin coached at Michigan, so those guys remembered him. But I thought your current coach had it going on, too, until last weekend. So you never know in this business.
John U. Bacon has written the book Overtime. Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines at the crossroads of college football. Last thing for you, because I know your time's a little short on this, and I hope we get together when Maryland plays Michigan, and I hope Maryland's like 2 and whatever by the time that happens. I don't think that'll be the case. The Harbaugh family, you mentioned fairness in Clemson. Look, we had Gary Williams here go out the side door and just say, I'm not going to cheat. I didn't want to cheat. I don't know the Harbaughs to cheat. I know deep down there's a real pissed offedness about Belichick cheating and confusing officials in playoff games and bending rules and who knows, monkeys in trees with cameras and signing on Antonio Brown and murderers and all this other stuff. The Ravens after the punch with Ray Rice, an end to it. I know the Harbaugh family really sort of discourages that sort of thing. Cheating at a game of Scrabble would get you thrown out of the family, whatnot. Cheating is so sort of un-Harbaugh, right? Sort of, kind of?
Oh, absolutely. They're adamant about that. And when Jim was at Stanford, he got in some trouble in Ann Arbor by saying that Michigan does a good job academically, and they have traditionally. But Stanford's doing a better job, and Michigan should do it Stanford's way, basically. I'm paraphrasing here. And that got back to Ann Arbor, obviously, and not so popular. But when Jim got to Ann Arbor, all of a sudden, Michigan is top 6 academically out of 131 D1 programs, and usually top 3 or so. And every year he asks his academic guy, did we beat Stanford? And every year the answer is yes. So that shows that for Jim, competitiveness is an expression of following the rules. In other words, if you cut corners, you've already lost. Basically, that's his mantra, more or less. And that comes from Jack, of course. So.
John U. Bacon can be found on the Twitter thing. His book can be found in a bookstore near you. A New York Times bestselling writer, public speaker, college lecturer, radio commentator who only tweets when he has something to say and only does radio when he has something to say, and he's got a book to sell. Overtime is the book, and I hope you go find it. And, hey, I hope next time you're in here researching the family Harbaugh that you don't get a tourist crab cake, so I'll make sure that happens, okay?
I've been there, and I love them, of course. What's that famous place? Christy, real quick, what's that crab cake place?
Fadley's, downtown. I'll be there Thursday.
You said it, too.
There
I was there a year ago with my wife. It is phenomenal.
Well, we'll be there Thursday with future mayoral candidate and current Baltimore City Council President Brandon Scott. He is John U. Bacon. The book is Overtime. I'm not going to hold you overtime. We'll do that next month. Appreciate you, John.
Nestor, my pleasure. Anytime, pal.
You got it. John U. Bacon joining us here from Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the Wolverines and the Harbaugh family are still trying to get it done for Big Blue. We'll see how that goes, and we'll see where we get to when Maryland gets there shortly. Beat Penn State first, is all I say. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Got a lot of stuff going on. Got a lot of new sponsors. Got some live shows. Going to be at Greenmount Station next week, swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry. Pat Ricard, my favorite Raven, two-way player, tackling quarterbacks, blowing up linebackers. Love it. He joins us on Tuesday. That'll be at Greenmount Station. We'll have some crab cakes that night as well out in Carroll County. And then on the 30th, we're at Adams Jeep in Aberdeen with Nick Boyle. We might also be talking about pets and our mutual love of animals as well. You can find me anytime, anywhere on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.